Hi, everyone, and welcome to another live faculty feature with Maryville Online. I'm your host, Tamara Jones, and today we'll be joined by Dr. Ashley Storman, who's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion here at Maryville. I'm going to go ahead and welcome Ashley to the show. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing really great. I am. I don't know why. I'm actually kind of nervous. This isn't the first time I've done this, but I'm very nervous today for some reason.
We'll be nervous
So,
together then. But this should be fun though.
yes, I'm really excited. This is the first time that we've had someone come on and speak about the topic of how to create inclusive spaces. So I think this is going to be really fun. So can we just start with a quick introduction? Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Maryville?
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. Ashley Storman. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as a director for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I have been with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for almost 4 years. However, I have been in this role for about 9 months. And so in this role, I supervise and manage the day-to-day operations of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. But I also collaborate and we partner with different departments across campus. And what we try to do is just provide an inclusive lens. So if it's new programming initiative, new strategies or policies that we're putting in place, we just want to be in that space to make sure that in everything that we implement and that we do at Maryville, that we're being inclusive.
That's awesome. I think that your role is a super interesting one, and I'm really excited to kind of get into this topic today. But one of the things that I think is really kind of special about you is the fact that you are the director of diversity and inclusion, but you're also an alum of Maryville University. So was it that you got your doctorate at Maryville?
Yes, that is correct. I got my doctorate 2019.
That's so cool. So you spent some time out of school before coming to Maryville and getting your doctorate degree after your master's. So after like more than 5 years out of school, what did it mean for you to go back to school?
Oh, that's a good question. Personally, it just meant everything. I always knew that I wanted to get my doctorate. I just didn't know when was a good time or when I should do it. And so what kind of really motivated me, me and my partner, we had our first child and just wanting to be able to show him that, you know, you can do anything that you want to, knowing that the doctorate would advance me along with my work experience. It was time, right? And so in 2017, 2016, I started the program at Maryville. And like I said, I just knew it would give me that competitive edge. I had the experience, but there are still some things that, you know, I needed to learn, and I knew that doctor would give me that. But most importantly, you know, I identify as a Black woman, right? And I think to me, it just meant success. Being a role model for my students, right? Being a mom, being a professional, being a leader, being a friend. So being that role model for my students, breaking generational curses. I am first generation low income student, the first in both sides of my family to get my doctorate. And so those things were very important to me. And then lastly, like when I think about it today, it's almost 2 years later from me having my doctorate. It just really means to me, it's an example of what Black Girl Magic is, right? Having that resilience, that dedication, that motivation to achieve your dreams and whatever you dream up, being able to do that. And so it was hard. Don't get me wrong. I experienced some imposter syndrome and everything else. But it was everything that I wanted to do. And typically, if I can make my mind up that I want to do something, I had great support from my family and friends. And so I was able to do it. So it meant everything. And it was one of the goals that I always wanted to make sure that I achieved.
I love that answer. I love it for so many different reasons. And we might even get into some of those reasons in these questions today. But I love that response. And I love how much how powerful it was for you to have that doctorate degree and continue your education. Because I know that going to school is no easy feat one time. Going to college is no easy feat one time. Going to college 3 times, I don't know that is a thing that a lot of people do. So something that you said sparked a question for me, and that was around the fact that you were a first generation college graduate, and 3 times over, and so how were you? I think one of the things that I'm super interested in is kind of how that influences the work that you do now. So do you feel like being a first generation college student has kind of given you some sort of insight or does it kind of influence the way that you do work now?
Absolutely. So like I said, I was a first generation student. And in my college experiences, I had some really, really great advisors, great mentors, great role models. Shout out to University of Northern Iowa. But I really had some great people who took care of me. I didn't know how to study. I didn't know, how to communicate to get the resources that I need. But I had these individuals who saw potential in me, believed in me. And so with working with them, and I realized eventually that I could go get my master's and work at the college level and do the same thing. I think that definitely did give me insight. Being able to understand the experiences of students from underrepresented backgrounds or first generation students, understanding that if they are having a difficulty in class, they may not be able to call their parents and say, hey, I'm dealing with this. Can you help me with this problem? Right. And so just always trying to offer them that holistic but also personalized support, because every student is not the same. They all have different experiences. And so I think it definitely did give me the insight, being able to have that background of an underrepresented student. I think I too now can understand and know what underrepresented students need. Or I think it also helps too with me being able to build that rapport and relationship with those students, them seeing me, knowing that I am just like them. They're able to relate to me. They're able to come to me and communicate with me. And we can have authentic conversations where I'm able to fully assist them for they can have success, whether it's in a student organization, a class, or, most importantly to all of us, graduating and walking across the stage.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, being able to kind of understand or at least empathize with the students who are underrepresented, who may have had a harder time getting into college, and have a hard time navigating through, as all of us do. Even if we aren't first generation, we all are going to encounter difficulties navigating through college, and being able to have that insight and have that empathy with those students, I think, is super important. I want to just quickly reset for everybody. Hi, everyone. Today we are joined by Dr. Ashley Storman, and we're going to be discussing how to create inclusive spaces. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the comments, and we'll pull them on the screen for Dr. Storman to respond to. So, all right, I'm going to get into the questions I actually had prepared. Your intro was just so magnificent that I wanted you to just elaborate on it. So,
yeah, no worries.
But the first question I really wanted to kind of chat with you about is just like, what does it mean to have an inclusive space? What does an inclusive space mean to you?
So an inclusive space to me means that regardless of how a person shows up, their social identities, how they look, how they feel, right? Regardless of all of that, when they show up in a space, that they feel accepted, that they feel valued, that they feel like this is a space where they can be authentic and be themselves. Basically a space where they feel seen. If they're seen and we know about their culture, their background, their identity, then that's an inclusive space for me. When you can show up and be yourself and you're appreciated and you're accepted and you feel comfortable.
So one of the things that you chatted about a bit in your last couple of answers is the diverse student groups and the underrepresented student groups that encounter Maryville University and other colleges across the United States. So if you had to kind of think about what you feel are the biggest challenges that diverse groups of students are facing today, what do you think those are?
Mhm. First, I would say representation, right? It definitely matters. And as you probably know, it's not many people of color, people from underrepresented positions or backgrounds that are kind of in these type of roles. And so I think sometimes it may be challenging for students as they go through their college journey, not seeing many people who look like them, right? It's important for them to be able to see people in leadership positions and director and program coordinator positions, seeing us present, doing interviews, different things like this, because when you see that representation, it just helps you with manifesting your goals, your success, and where you want to be. So I definitely think a challenge right now in education is representation for those young ones coming behind us. And the reason I say that, I'm in my mid 30s and thinking about VP Harris, right? Our vice president, she's a woman of color, right? And I never really thought about what it would be like or what it would look like or even manifested seeing a vice president that's a woman of color, right? But now that I see that, it gave me a new excitement. It gave me more determination to know that women can be in any seat, right? And so now seeing that representation, that matters so much to me that I want to push to new levels. And so that same representation that I've seen in my vice president, I think women and students from underrepresented backgrounds, they need to see that same representation when they're on campus and they're in their classrooms and they're in their student organization events and things like that. The other challenge I would say, which is very timely right now, is all students right now are dealing with the pandemic, right? We're used to being on campus, going to our classrooms, stopping by our friends' rooms, the Center for Student Engagement, and just hanging out, right? But that's so different. But then if we think about, Tamara, the summer of 2020, it wasn't an easy summer. So now I'm at home. You think about all the things around racism, discrimination. We've seen the repeated deaths of Black men and women. Now I have to deal with that on top of being in a pandemic, right? And then if we think about our Latinx community, DACA, and seeing, your family members, those who identify with you, being mistreated, right? And so that's another thing that students are dealing with, the pandemic, and then all of these social injustices. And then the last thing that I can think about when I think about students from like low income socioeconomic statuses right now in this time, it's really hard for these students, right? We're at home. For instance, like today, we're at home, right? If a student may not have the proper equipment, they may not have Wi-Fi. That is a challenge for students as well. And so from representation to dealing with the pandemic and being able to have the resources that you need to be successful in your work or in your classroom, I think those are all things that students are dealing with, both underrepresented and all students at this time, because this is a different time for all of us to be dealing with this pandemic and working from home or doing school from home.
Yes, exactly. All of us are going through a lot of different challenges. And I think that a lot of those things are exacerbated by exactly what you said, like a digital divide, having access to technology, being able to representation, seeing yourself in these leadership positions or seeing yourself actually achieving all the things that you're working so hard to do. All of those things are huge challenges, and it's all being exacerbated by a pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, from in your work, how are you equipping these students who are facing all of these challenges? How are you equipping them to find success?
So one thing that we do with the students in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we first start with teaching the students to learn about themselves and their own culture, right? So who are you? How does your culture show up? How do you get to know more about yourself, right? So then once I know more about myself, now I can be open to learning about you. I can be open to learning about my peers that are different from me and looking at your culture, your background, the things your community deal with when it comes to privilege and oppression, right? So then now I can look at your culture and understand it and see what similarities that we have, but what are the differences that I can learn to appreciate as well. And so we have our students start with that, knowing themselves and then knowing their peers. And then the next thing that we teach them is how to have difficult conversations. How do you be an ally for yourself? And when we teach them about having these different difficult conversations or nonviolent dialogues, it's not about having a conversation with you and trying to change your mind. I don't want to change your mind. But what I do is I want to understand, how did you get to this type of mind frame? How did you get to this thought? What is your psychosocialization? How were you raised, right? Because then from there, maybe we can find common ground on these issues or this concern or this problem that we may have. And so we really teach our students learning about themselves, learning about their peers, and then how to have these difficult conversations. And from that, students are able to advocate for themselves, whether it's in the classroom, whether they're on a team, if it's getting assistance with utilizing resources or resources that you need, just getting them to know that there is difference, there is appreciation in that difference, and then equipping them with the skills to have these difficult conversations, because you can have difficult conversations as long as it's professional and respectful. You can still get that message across. And so those are some of the things that we equip students with that work with us, is appreciating diversity, but also making sure that we're always being inclusive leaders.
I think it was just kind of interesting the way that you mentioned how you're really helping students understand themselves and then wanting to be curious about each other. And for me, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that is like embracing lived experience. So like Absolutely. Embracing each other's lived experience. And so I think that that is super key when it comes to creating a culture like that's inclusive, having spaces that are inclusive. So can you, I guess, give some examples of ways to create a culture that validates and embraces lived experiences of its members so that we can have inclusive spaces?
Definitely. So the first thing that I think about is when we're creating these spaces and building these relationships of inclusivity, you have to build relationships and rapport. I've always felt that way, that relationships and rapport were very important. But recently at Maryville, we had Dr. Joy DeCrue come, and she wrote the book of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And a big thing that I got from her working with us at Maryville and coming to speak with us is the importance of relationships, right? And so I think in any space that you're trying to make inclusive, you have to have relationships with the people that you work with, or if it's your classroom or it's your team. You have to be able to build those relationships and build that rapport, because then when you have that, then you can go to the next level, right? Of learning more about that individual's community. What are they dealing with right now? And not asking that individual, hey, what is your community dealing with? But going to do the work yourself, right? Going on Google, reading the news articles, watching the news, and really learning about what's happening to different cultures in our society. And then I think the next thing you have to do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We tell our students this all the time. If you're comfortable in doing this work, then you need to stretch yourself a little bit more, because even me as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, I still always can learn and do work, right? And so those are a few things that you can do, but also reach out and check in and make the space for these conversations. An example that I always like to share, I learned that our life coaches at Maryville, when everything was happening this summer with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and things like that, they really made space for their team to be able to come together and have conversations, right? And I think that's where a lot of learning comes, is being able to have these hard conversations. And so if you have the relationships, you're okay with being uncomfortable, you're willing to make the space for these conversations, I think that is how you can create space for lived experiences. However, I will say, Tamara, that you don't want to depend on those lived experiences, right? Because not everyone wants to come to work or come into the classroom and talk about my experience as a Black woman or as a Hispanic male, or, someone who identifies with the LGBTQIA+ community. And so in that, being able to do your own work and research so that you can understand their experiences as well is important when creating these type of spaces.
Thank you so much for sharing that answer. And I apologize for the Alexa interruption that we got. Okay. So I feel like since we got that interruption, this is a good time for me to kind of reset. For the people who are watching or just joined us, today we're being joined by Dr. Ashley Storman to discuss creating inclusive spaces. So as I said earlier, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the comments, and we'll push them on screen so that Dr. Storman can respond to them. In the meantime, while everybody is thinking about their questions, I have another one for you. So you gave a few recommendations around kind of how to embrace lived experience, but also just how to go out and do the work yourself, go out and do the research yourself. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips or recommendations for people who want to create a more inclusive space in their sphere of influence, like maybe resources that they can tap into, or just any recommendations that you have?
Yeah. So I think there's always some great books out there. So one that I just mentioned by Dr. Joy DeGruy. You have Michael Eric Dyson. He writes some great books. So just getting white fragility. So there's a number of books that you can simply read if you want to read it with a friend or a group to be able to have those conversations, because we have to keep talking about the social injustices that are happening. If we don't talk about them, then we don't know how to solve them. We don't know how to make the experiences for ourselves, for our students, our friends, our colleagues. We don't know how to make those experiences better. So, just definitely doing the research, getting into the books. There's books on anti-racism. There's so much out there that if you just do a quick Google search on a topic that you're interested in, you'll find something. But also for those individuals who are at Maryville, we have diversity dialogues a couple of times a semester. So that's a great opportunity too, to come out to the diversity dialogue. It usually includes the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Lombardi comes to those, and also Taran Mullins, who is the senior advisor to the president for access and opportunity. We're usually all in that space. And so that's a great opportunity to talk about current social justice issues and come have those conversations. But just keep talking about it, keep doing your research, and just don't be intimidated or scared to have these conversations. I think a lot of times when it comes to diversity and inclusion, a lot of folks are scared to initiate the conversation or the initiative or the new policy or program, but you have to do it. And if you make a mistake and you're a genuine person, you just apologize and you learn from it and you move on. But being scared, not speaking up, not sharing your thoughts or what you may think is the right thing to do, I don't think that's going to assist you. You just have to, you've had presentations, you've had the knowledge now, just try to apply it and you'll learn as you go.
I could not get myself off mute. I think those are super great resources. There are a ton of books out there, as you mentioned. I think there are some great podcasts out there as well, where you can just kind of sit in and listen to people talk about their experiences. It's one of those things where it's like, people aren't necessarily going to, as you said, want to walk into a classroom or walk into a workplace and constantly talk about their experience. But there are resources like podcasts where people are kind of just sitting there and talking about their experiences. And that gives you this open window into into conversations that you wouldn't necessarily be a part of. It gives you that opportunity to be a fly on the wall. And I think those are great opportunities to learn too.
Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, those are the end of my questions. And I feel like this is a really great stopping point. We've been here for about a half hour. If anybody does have any questions for Dr. Storman, you can drop them in the comments. So we'll wait another 30 seconds or so to see if anybody wants to drop a comment. But in the meantime, I will solo and turn this so that it's not showing all that. In the meantime, I did want to just thank Dr. Storman for joining us today. We are always having conversations on our channels, whether that is our LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram channels. We're having conversations with faculty and alums all the time. So be sure to follow us and check out our page for more conversations. Until next time, bye everyone.